everybody. I'm Jenny Russell. Thank you, John, for that video. I think that was worthwhile. A good way to start our panel. So I'm really honored and delighted to be here. It's a wonderful opportunity to join John, the Hunger Project, and all of you. And I see a lot of familiar faces from our work together over the past decades, I can say. So I'm delighted to be here in part because I feel like this is really a great opportunity to talk about action. You know, the beginning panel this morning was kind of talking about the significance and value of our words, and this panel is really talking about the importance of action. And that is how we find the concrete things that we can do to really shift power to communities and ensure that communities are part of the design and the prioritization and the implementation and evaluation of projects. So I'm really delighted to be here and delighted to be with our esteemed panel, who I am very much looking forward to introducing. I just wanted to say one thing in terms of my own introduction, and that is one thing that really became valuable for me was digging into the program cycle at USAID and really looking at how U.S. government can shift the power into the hands of communities better. And Save the Children in Oxfam in 2016 put together a piece of work called The Power of Ownership, and it provides a theory of change around the importance of ownership. And we also put together a practitioner's guide of how development officials can actually do community-led development better. And it takes you through all the parts of the program cycle, and it really challenges U.S. government officials to answer the question, how are communities involved in every single step of the way? So that was really important and valuable for me to think through, how this can be done better. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to start on my left. Well, all panelists are on my left. Okay. We are very honored to have Greg Collins with us, who is the Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Bureau of Food Security at USAID. And he leads the U.S. government's Global Hunger and Food Security Initiative, Feed the Future, and is proposed to become the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security under USAID's transformation. Greg also serves as the agency's resilience coordinator and is a recognized global thought leader on resilience. He formerly served as a director of the USAID Center for Resilience and has led the effort to develop and operationalize a strategic vision for resilience at USAID. So thank you very much, Greg, for being here.
Thank you.
I'm also very honored to say hello to a community representative from Vietnam, Giang, who joins us. She lives here in DC, but was able to join us, and she is a grassroots change maker from Vietnam who serves the underprivileged communities with small acts, who does not take no for an answer, and who recognizes the importance of self-care. Because she knows that a happy soul serves happily. So many moons ago, she used to work at a multinational aid agency, and she left and started her own organization, Action for the City. At one point, they had 17 staff. Seeing herself drowned in the superficiality of financial capital, she expanded to multiple forms of capital. Part of the staff salary came in vegetables that they grew together. Down that path, she downsized to just a few paid staff and a lot more volunteers. She turned her city office into an art studio in rural Hoi An, and which took over a barren piece of land and saved it from yet another high-rise by involving hundreds of local volunteers to build a playground, soccer field, and community center, and planting lots of trees. One of their most valuable workshops roughly translates to Schools Without Walls. It's a 10-day program that involves farm work, local volunteering, compassionate clowning, and spending a day without any money or cell phones. conversation with elders, and a whole lot more. Wow, that sounds like the kind of lifestyle I would like to lead.
Yes. It doesn't sound like USAID then.
No. And last but not least, I'm very happy to introduce Mesfin Loha. Mesfin is currently the country program director from South Sudan for World Vision International. His training includes a degree as MD from Addis Ababa University and Gadar College of Medical Sciences and an MPH from a well-known university in Brussels, including a diploma in healthcare and management in tropical countries from the Swiss Tropical Institute in 1996. His extensive work experience includes leading the National Gondar Health Zone under the Ministry of Health in Ethiopia, responsible for the health and population of 2.5 million people. This was followed by various health assignments in World Vision Ethiopia, East Africa, and other places in Africa, including relief experience in the field of maternal, newborn, and child nutrition. Thank you so much for being with us. So what I'd like to do is ask each panelist one question and have them answer, and then I will go to the audience to get some questions from you all, and then I'll move to the second question. So first of all, I would like to ask Greg. USAID is committed to the journey of self-reliance. We all have heard that the USAID's transformation includes more of a focus on the reliance of countries and communities. Greg, what linkage, if any, do you see between self-reliance and the practice of community-led development?
Great, and I think what I'll do is also connect that to our work on resilience, because I think there's some important parallels. And I'm going to maybe cheat a little bit. I know we want to get into practice, but I think part of the reason I was so excited to participate in this event is words do actually matter, and they matter in a very fundamental way. And so I was talking to Michelle, where she just before we started here, about the fact that some of us, certainly the work of USADF, certainly a lot of the work that you guys have been doing, have been forward-leaning into the concept of the journey to self-reliance for quite some time, recognizing that it's not just the development outcomes that we seek to improve, but it's just as important to build the commitment capacity of countries, meaning not just governments, but governments, private sector, communities themselves. But there's a power to Mark Green having named it and repeated over and over again this concept of a journey to self-reliance, because if you think about it, you could just dismiss it as jargon, the latest buzzword, but if you really think about what it's saying that our measures of progress will not simply be whether we reduce malnutrition, reduce food insecurity, improved health outcomes, improved education outcomes. It will be whether what we've done through our programs, through policy intervention, through other aspects of how we influence the world, have we actually helped move the needle on the capacity and commitment of countries. And so from a measurement perspective, we have our country roadmaps as a sort of higher order proxy measures of that. But it's really demanded that we demonstrate how that behavioral change is happening, how the behavior change of how we implement is happening, and how that speaks to this building of commitment and capacity at both a government country level, but also at a local community level as well. And I draw the parallel with resilience because I spent the first half of my career working with FAO, working with WFP as a vulnerability analyst. And we were talking about vulnerability, deficits, constraints, and what was missing. And that really put a lens on what we focused on. The concept of resilience, you could also dismiss it as a buzzword, as just wordplay. But if you take it seriously, it actually completely flips the dialogue. And it says we really have to focus on assets, abilities, and agency. So who's the good social scientist in the room who can tell me what agency means?
About when you have sort of an ownership connection to your own life.
Ownership, the ability to shape your own future, even choice is connected to that. So we've got some new data out of northern Kenya. It's not attributable to USAID's efforts. It's actually attributable to the combined efforts of donors, the leadership of the government of Kenya through its Ending Drought Emergencies Initiative, the great work that USAID and other partners are doing on the ground, the county governments that have been empowered with a budget and authority through the devolution process. But we've shown that between 2013 and 2018, we've actually seen a reduction in poverty despite 3 major drought events of upwards of 30%. But that's not the most exciting finding that we found. We actually found that between 2013 and 2018, the percentage of people who believed they had a hand in shaping their own future, that they could actually be architects of their own future, went from 32% in 2013 to 72% in 2018. And that's what transformation is really about. That's what agency is really about. I spent my early career based in Garissa, so I know northern Kenya very, very well. And we've been delivering food aid there for 25 years, if not longer. And I would go to communities and we would, and I'd say, well, why haven't you desilted this water pan? And they said, well, nobody's brought the food aid for us to do it yet. That level of thinking about the lack of control over their own destiny and future. So to see this transformation underway in northern Kenya, to see that it's country-led, with a government that's really done a 180 on how it thinks about vulnerability and drought crises in the north of the country. So it's country-led. It's driven at a localized level through devolution, and it's about empowered communities shaping their own future. And so I'm super proud of having made some small contribution to that poverty reduction, but I'm mega proud about having made some contribution to that change in agency over time. And so, you know, we need to get to the practical stuff of how we actually get communities in the driver's seat, how we get communities making demands of their own governments as part of the development enterprise. But this whole idea that words matter, that concepts matter, is fundamental, I think, to this conversation. And it's also, we'll maybe talk about it later in the conversation, but it also sort of puts an importance on measurement and how we measure these things. And one of the fundamental things we've learned through the resilience work at USAID is that self-perceptions, people's own perceptions about their ability to lean on other households, about their ability to manage and recover from shock events, provide fundamental insights in ways that our attempts to use proxies like their roof type or something simply miss the mark. So hopefully we'll have a chance to talk a bit about that.
Thank you so much.
And Giang, I mean, thank you for being here again, and maybe you can give us some wisdom from your years as a community organizer. And someone who has worked both in local level as well as the international development sector. What do you think is the most important for shifting the power to the community?
Thank you. It's hard for me to say just one thing that's most important. Since we are here and this is Gandhi anniversary, for me, the word "be the change" is the key. So it started from my own journey. Started out all my career more than 10 years ago, 10 to 5 years ago. Graduated when Vietnam joined the world. Like my friend who said before about Pakistan at the time, full of hope and optimism, Vietnam more than 20 years ago was like that. And I am one of the youngest, just graduate from university with such a big hope. Very soon into the process, I myself, I work for international organization, work as a manager, rising star, quickly, but I found my own self being drained out, and I thought, why is that? Where's the dream that I started with? How come I'm too busy to just to say hi to my friends? How come I'm seen as a manager, but not having the time to really be at the, where things happen? So if you ask me, it's important for my own journey to see whatever I'm doing is for transformation at a personal level. And to me, that's the only word I can serve, is start from within. And embracing the values that we like to see in the world.
Thank you. That is pathetic and does say something about how important work-life balance is for all of us, right? Well, thank you so much. And Mesfin, maybe you can speak from the perspective of the implementer organization and your time at World Vision. And do you find that development work in humanitarian situations can be truly community-led? And from your own experience in South Sudan and other development contexts, how does community-led development differ between the humanitarian and the development setting?
Thank you very much. Indeed, I very strongly believe that humanitarian and development work in any context, whether it's in a fragile context or along the nexus, humanitarian development peace nexus, can be community-led. And it has to be through different methods and mechanisms that all actors must put in place for it to be successful, of course. Yes, this morning we talked a lot about words matter, but actions matter more. So to come up with actions that really take people to the level that they would like to move to the next level requires a change, I would say, in our approach to development, especially in a humanitarian context. To speak mostly about South Sudan at the moment, close to 85–90% or so of resources that go to South Sudan at the moment are primarily addressing humanitarian emergency needs, but there's a lot of good work that's coming up. The recent conversation around resilience led by USAID and the UN system, a lot of organizations taking part, is really waking people up, all actors, including the government and communities, because that's what can change how humanitarians and development workers speak, act, and change. That's how. As World Vision, we say we must start with the mindset. We must start with the people. We must start with the way we think. We must start with the way people think about themselves. We must start by addressing how government think about the people, the needs, the donors, and everybody. And mobilizing communities to first and foremost think about what they can do within the resources they have, the gifts, the knowledge, the faith, their relationships, community leadership, organizations, informal structures, what they have at hand in that particular situation to make use, to change and determine their lives. Not a straitjacket, globally designed work on every project. One of the big challenges we have at the moment is a projectized approach to this very intricate development work. For everything we have global standards. It gets contextualized at country level, it gets somehow contextualized at community level also, but without sufficient time to listen and understand what works and what doesn't work. And in all of this, we miss the basics. And if we can't get the basics right in humanitarian and development work, everything will be in vain.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. I completely agree with that. And I think how to get beyond the challenges of kind of the strict earmarks and 3 to 5 year program cycle, and 5 if you're lucky, right? And the strict metrics that you need to achieve in the kind of input-driven development, I think, is really a challenge. So turning to the audience, it would be great to have a couple questions for our panel. Who would like to start us out?
Hi folks, I'm Noelle Schroeder. I'm a consultant and community organizer who also moved from the multinational space into local development. And Giang, I'd love to ask you a little bit more about how you used that space to build out these alternative systems and alternative programs, which sound very explicitly anti-capitalist, and how you use those to build power within the community, and what you want to do or what the community wants to do with that power.
Wow. Good question. So, just briefly to answer you, I draw on my personal reflection. As always, and mine is very narrow, so just a little bit personal. I would say I always ask myself, what is the essence of myself? If I see myself as a development worker or working in social sector, what's that is the most essential thing that I am to bring about to the world. And to this day, my answer is still about building trust. That's in the end of the day. Trust started at an individual level. I trust in the goodness, the intention, in my power to make change. But I also contribute to building trust among individuals in the community and across community and among nations, right? That's what and so the central to that, it is the guiding principle for my work. So one of the things I cannot say, I just listed out a few things and I don't know which ones are relevant. Is really I started moving away from having an organizational identity, because I found that having an organization identity sometimes being part of the competition. When I started working out NGO sector more than 20 years ago, we used to come to each other's office. We share staff, we share lesson learned, we share resources. Somehow 10 years down the road, we become competitive for funding. And that is hard. So my first step is, how are we going to break down that organizational structure, institutional structure, and building trust among ourselves? That's one. Second thing is, when we come into community, in order to really have reflection, I think we need home space for stillness. Yes, it is important to dialogue. It is important to express, but it's equally important for going to listen.
A lot of times these kind of damaging gender norms prevent girls from really speaking out and speaking up in their communities, and I'm curious if you have any examples to share about how you've worked with girls in particular.
Your questions about urban community is, again, I go back to Gandhi's vision. His vision is really revitalize rural villages and rural way of life, which, I also understand that we are living in a modern world of an opposite of urbanization, and especially Vietnam and, a country like that, the rate of urbanization is like really, really powerful. So we engage but so we cannot do that exactly, just prevent something that is happening, but instead we look at what is true essence of rural life. And one of that is reliance. It's reliant in the most fundamental way of food. Rural community feed themselves, and that is big, because that is the only way you can live in a cash economy, when you are self-sufficient. So with that in mind, we work with urban community, but with a lot, with that kind of how are we as a community take care of each other. So of course, urban food, like urban community garden and stuff is not enough, but it is in that direction. And it's also in the direction of an answer. One of the things that make me very unpopular in the NGO group in Vietnam is that I go to any meeting and I never say funding is a main issue. I never think funding, and it's not popular among the funding group or among other NGOs. People don't want to hear that, but I believe money is never the main issue here. So second thing is how to unlock that so multiple, relationship between people in a community. And so what we did is, a lot of like in our own organization, we pay people by produce in our garden. You know, we have like people in the community who would contribute into hours of volunteer, and that is helping with childcare. So that is normally paid with cash, but it's something that actually building that relationship and more than just transactional. So those that's a guiding thing. Is whatever you do is not transaction. I pay you this and you do this service. It is about how we engage to transform ourselves, the giver and the receiver, and it change dynamic. And the third one about women and girls that you asked about gender, I would say we often started out by something that's so in depth to the household, such as food, waste management, thing that people think about is about. Then is easily just have women interested in that. And even we have meeting that men dominate, but soon it's not something they put in their interest. So they kind of losing out, and it's a kind of natural thing for women to, because women care about food for their family. Women care about clean kind of neighborhood, things like that. Sorry for men in the room.
We also give some.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, Ramona.
I'm Ramona. So kind of building off of what you just said, I totally agree. The problem usually is not a lack of funding. I think taking that even further, I think the problem is not even a lack of capacity, or the need to build capacity. If you look at a lot of the countries that the U.S. and other donors have worked in, there have been capacity building programs for decades and decades and decades. It might be a 3-year stint, but like you said, it can go on for up to 20 years. So the bottom line is that instead of building capacity, it seems like the focus should also be on building political will. So not just identifying the problem, but figuring out why is it this problem persists for so long. So in this self-reliance work that AID is now doing, you mentioned the building capacity, but I'm wondering, what about the building political will? What are you doing to ensure, or trying to incentivize these governments to ensure that they are actually trying to build self-reliance? Because, frankly, sometimes it's much easier to have outsiders coming in and running your education systems, your hospitals, etc. So what are you doing to incentivize them to build political will to actually resolve these problems in their own self-reliance?
Great, and that's a great question, because we have done capacity building for an awful long time. I think the results are mixed on that. I often reflect when I engage, particularly in Sahelian West Africa, ECOWAS, on the value of those investments made 25, 30 years ago in enabling people from there to get PhDs here who are now leading out there, and we don't do that anymore. So there's some, I think, some questions about what we do and don't do on capacity building. But to directly answer your question, this is why the journey of self-reliance is sort of double-barreled. It's not just about capacity, it's about commitment, and it's about government commitment. That's often expressed in their own investment. So one of the reasons we view the government of Kenya and what they've done in northern Kenya with the Any Drought Emergencies Initiative as a huge success story, and maybe in contrast a little bit to Ethiopia, which is more emergent. So in Ethiopia, donors have funded this mega productive safety net program for 4 phases. The government had an in-kind contribution, but under threat of us backing off, they're now starting to pick up some of the actual financial bill, and so we can have a sustainable vision of that. In contrast to Kenya, the Kenyan government used to look at northern Kenya as a donor problem. That's where donors respond to problems. It's not really our responsibility. They're not an important voting bloc. They're not powerful in parliament. Something changed from through the 90s and early 2000s, where pastoralists got a voice in parliament, started operating as a bloc and demanding things of government, and the government actually did a 180. So when we talk about the Ending Drought Emergencies Initiative in northern Kenya, our investment in that is about, I think it's around 400 million. The government of Kenya has put $1.6 billion against the Ending Drought Emergencies Initiative, and all donors total have only put 1.5. So they not only committed the cash, they also actually shaped the strategy and its 6 pillars. We supported, we helped, but they own that from the beginning to the end, rather than us producing a strategy and saying it was government owned because they were at the table. So I think we have these emergent models. It's increasingly difficult sometimes we have the commitment without the capacity, and that's equally problematic. And I look at a place like Niger, where we've got a government that does want to do the right thing with Nigerians, Nourish Nigerians initiative, but they frankly don't have the capacity right now to fully pull it off. So I think trying to strike a balance and figuring out where we intervene and making sure that it's not just USAID. I mean, we're one piece of the U.S. government. There are lots of pieces in the U.S. government that we can employ to get people, to get countries to commit. And then, as I said earlier, it's not just about governments. It's about private sector, and it's about communities themselves. So we have a big role to play as donors in incentivizing the private sector to invest and test working in areas they're unaccustomed to. And again, I'll point back to the Northern Kenya example. Incentivizing private sector vet services into Northern Kenya was difficult because on a pure business model, they wouldn't have gone alone. But once we de-risk by frankly subsidizing a little bit, it's proven profitable enough that they're actually now running with it themselves. So I think we need to be very particular about how we incentivize. Sometimes it's cash to incentivize the private sector. Sometimes it's, I don't want to say threat, but sometimes, when you're in the fourth phase of the safety net program in Ethiopia, and the U.S. government's putting in $80 million to $100 million a year into the safety net program, you've got to begin to ask yourself, what's the road out of here, and what's the road for, particularly as Ethiopia's experienced economic development, et cetera.
That's great, thank you. So I think what we're going to do, since we're getting a little, short on time, is we're going to ask all the questions that the audience can give us, and then we're going to have each of our panelists answer those questions and then provide their closing remarks as well at the same time. So who else would like to ask a question?
Mesfin, I'm familiar with South Sudan. I was a refugee in 1985. I know World Vision has been there, I don't know, it's maybe 50 years. I don't know why they don't accomplish their mission. That's too long. I've been there, I'm a refugee. Migrated from Ethiopia, 1984. The question I have is to Mr. Greg. I visited in Ethiopia, Feed the Future. And Feed the Future, they have a big amount of money, but they spend it on the Duncan Desert. Nobody, even Ethiopia, we don't never see it. It's so hot. And then Rift Valley. And then I communicated with them, why don't you invest on Hunger Project? Because Hunger Project, 9 epic centers, they're going to graduate 2020. So Feed the Future is helping community. And then farmer to farmer, the same thing they do. And then run by USAID. And then I talked to Mr. Rachel Beckham, you might know her. And she is ambassador for 5 countries in Ethiopia, American Embassy. She sent me the Feed the Future, I didn't get no answer. And then why US Feed support Hunger Project? Because Hunger Project, one epic center, helps from 10 to 15,000 farmers. So I visited one of epic center in Ethiopia. They graduated because they didn't accomplish because of community, the help of kind of things. So what plan you have those 9 epic centers to continue?
I didn't pay him to say that.
No, you don't have to pay me.
When you get John, you can't pay him. I collect the check.
Yeah, I can position by myself. I say, yeah, Hunger Project diaspora coordinator. I give a myself, and then we have appointment tomorrow in Ethiopian embassy to add on this one to add the government involved to open the road. At the same time, same question. Why don't you approach diaspora in America? And instead of going to Kenya, I heard a lot about Kenya. I'm jealous, but we beat them in the marathon. So I don't, you understand my question.
Okay, great. We're going to put more questions on the table from the audience. Let's see. Sir? Oh, I think he needs the mic. Yep.
I've been trying to figure out how to phrase this. It's sort of more of a somewhat philosophical, I guess, question. But it seems when we start talking about empowering, we could approach this in very different ways, and there's a spectrum between them. And one is that you could empower individuals and households to function well in a market economy and to feel like they're more the architects of their lives, right? Or you can, the other end of the spectrum would be focusing primarily on communities, collective action, and everything that goes with that. And obviously there can be a mix of the two. And I just wonder how, it just seems like that's really important to keep in mind as we talk about community-led development as to making, I mean, we all probably have different opinions about that. And so my question is how, to all three who want to just sort of reflect on that a little bit, but I also wonder, Greg, about the word self-reliant. And for me, when I hear self-reliant, it has more of a connotation of focused on the individual. It doesn't have to, I understand that. I really like what you're talking about, so there's not a disagreement there. But I'm just wondering if that kind of focus of USAID might tend to have more of that individual household kind of focus, particularly when there's also language around open markets and preparing people for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. And I think we're just going to go right across the room all the way. And the next mic to this woman. And if you can try to keep your questions short. Thank you.
I have two perspective questions just in terms of projects. The idea of how you worked, you mentioned sort of a while back about project funding. Sometimes that's not effective, but instead looking at it from a bigger perspective. And what's the language you use when you're speaking with funders in terms of getting them to understand that longer perspective that's more valuable versus the project? And then in thinking about the work that we do that's urban, very urban based, and how you are connecting youth and children who maybe don't have as active a parent because of whatever reason to elders in the community to build that. I honestly wrote down that was the best statement of the entire day for me personally. And how you can include those rural principles within it. So I'd love to understand that.
Hi, Annette Scarpita. I'm a Global Giving Project leader. Probably get over here for the sound. So all of you are pretty high level, except Giang, which you're really at the grassroots community level. So I'm wondering about the hierarchy between you and members of the communities you serve. There are a lot of layers. And this morning we were talking about the regional level, how sometimes that's a brick wall. So I see a challenge of all the layers that you're working with higher up, getting to the community people, how you do that, because there are a lot of steps in between that could skew things up. The regional government, the contractors, the subs, who actually, are supposed to carry it through, and sometimes these on-the-ground workers have other interests at stake. So I wanted to ask about your input of that and how to make the best impact you can at that individual community and people level.
Okay, thank you. All right. I think we have one more question here. Yeah.
So, Greg, so just a delicate question. USAID and State Department. Oftentimes there's a thing between them. I don't know if to use what the thing is, but there's this, and I asked this question because I want to specifically look at Haiti and how, on one hand, USAID is doing all this work, and at the same time, at the political, diplomatic level in Haiti, it's like if USAID and Haiti are USAID and state are working against each other. And we can't talk about these countries without acknowledging that reality. So I just want to know how do we break past that thing? And I'll ask Mesfin afterwards. I'll ask a question because I'm curious about the bridge between humanitarian and development and how to work in that space. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Did I miss anybody? Okay. Last question.
I'll be quick, I promise. I'll run for a mic. My question
Is for Greg and Mesfin. One of the things that we heard today in this session is the importance of practicing the things internally, individually in our organizations that we want to ask of the communities that we're working with. And so I'm wondering for donor agencies, for INGOs, from your particular experiences or from within the communities that you travel, how do you see these shifts of power happening within your own agencies? How do you see hierarchies flattening? How do you see distributed power, more collective decision making? How do you either see that happening now, or how do you intend to create those changes?
Okay, wow, a lot of amazing questions on the table for you guys to try to address. We only have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to give you that time for each of you to provide some responses and your closing remarks. Mesfin, you want to start?
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll respond to a few of the questions and then I'll make my comments. When it comes to funding and conversation with the donors and partners, what we would like to say more and more is about flexibility. Some of these very sensitive, difficult issues that we deal with are not addressed with the 6 months project, which we often get into, a 1-year project, sometimes even a 3-year funding. So flexibility and long-term funding on issue-based programs. We would like to engage more with, this is a community vision. This is the plan for Community A in Western Equatoria of South Sudan, and this is what it takes. And then we start conversation on what a particular donor or supporter can contribute, because it will be also difficult for one single agency or donor to do such things. So more around flexibility, possibility for longer term and predictable funding if we are to address all of these things. Because most of the real issues, especially we talk about the underlying causes of poverty, it requires, first of all, long term, and second, layering and sequencing of interventions until a particular household or a community segment graduates into a level that is better than the way before. So it's the current funding architecture has to be really looked into if we are to succeed, especially in some very difficult contexts. Going to the question on humanitarian development, I see it as a package. Yes, when it comes to humanitarian emergency response, our primary focus will be saving lives, so emergency intervention to save lives. But even within saving lives intervention, there are many things we can do that can build capacity so that people can absorb and adapt to shocks and then build into a resilience programming. Again, specifically development-focused intervention, they should always have the capability for disaster risk reduction, emergency response, and capability to respond to emergencies as we are implementing development programs as well. So to operate within such a spectrum requires a deeper analysis of the problems and then agility to adapt to emerging situations. So continuous monitoring of context becomes absolutely essential to make quick decisions. But it's not about implementing partner making these decisions. It's to bring all partners, supporters, donors on board so that we collectively make these decisions so that programs will be successful. I think I will, at this point, make my comments. I know there were a number of questions I would like to respond to, but for the sake of time. Community-led development and helping, working with communities to make decisions that matter to them most, and enabling them to take ownership of their destiny and their development is possible, but it requires a different approach that is being practiced in many parts of humanitarian and development work. It requires a huge amount of coordination, collaboration, and convergence. It is way beyond a single organization's mandate or even capabilities, because there are very multifaceted challenges within even a very small context in a particular geographic area. So collaboration, coordination, and convergence, addressing each of these pillars that contribute to longer term development and resilience would be something we would like to champion as World Vision. Thank you.
Thanks, Mesfin.
I just want to respond to your question quickly, and then that'll be my comment, final remark. It's what I found is, no matter what, we have not started out looking at the most marginalized, our youth at risk. But whatever we do, just go to the heart of it, and somehow, just in the ripple effect, it touched. We started out with community garden, and it touched domestic violence. It touched, youth delinquency. But it is keep doing it. And one of the things that I move away from being director of NGO or manager of big project is a lot of my time not about showing value to get more funding, but actually adding more value. And once I change that, I see values everywhere. There's so many opportunities to nurture the ripple effect. And to the final remark, I would think that, again, it comes from who we see ourselves as the people in the world. And for me, I always see, it's about serving, opportunity to serve, to become a better person. I used to think I serve to the world to be a better place, but now I come to a place of we serve to transform ourselves, and a place of gratitude. And for community, I think if community, that it still starts from individual and the people who are out there, change agent, community worker, into organizations. I would say, because this is an international development, I have to say that. Sorry, but I have to say honestly, I thought development is manifesting in natural world. Development is the process of manufacturing your true nature, become who you're meant to be. That is the same for community, for a nation. And a lot of what international organization, government, whatever can do is stop something you're doing, not anymore. I'm sorry to say that. So I would say for what is work, see as a community, working from a community level, looking up at the world, at a macro level, I see that international NGOs can be a great beneficiary, bring a lot of contribution to the world, not much by service delivery. Yes, there is service delivery sometimes, but most of your time, to my understanding, facilitating that advocacy in your own country. Educating your own citizen. Because if citizens in one country are very well informed, and then it helps greatly to other communities around the world. So advocacy in your country, advocacy because the international organization have that global capacity to connect. A small NGO would never be able to do that. So y'all will be able to, I think Osman knew beautifully well in advocacy and global research. You got that ability to gather all this evidence and data and have that voice to dialogue with our big government. So I would say I'm hopeful because there is a chance for a shift in our paradigm.
Thank you so much. And Greg, you have the last word.
Well, I might have answered some of these questions very differently before sitting next to Giang. Questioning my career choices. But I do want to answer a couple of them. I mean, I thought this was a very interesting question. How are we manifesting this practically in our organizations? And you're probably not going to find a heavier lift than the huge bureaucracy in the U.S. government that's undergoing a reorganization for that challenge. It's super tough. But I had a really sort of enlightening experience a week and a half ago in Dakar. We had brought all of our resilience coordinators from our now 13 resilience-focused countries, which include Haiti and include South Sudan. But we were very intentional about demanding that the USAID missions also send Foreign Service nationals from each country. And we have a very powerful woman who will be in DC at the end of the month named Giang, who is a Foreign Service national in Kenya, who is the heart, soul, and leadership behind our successful resilience work in northern Kenya. And what she did in Dakar was establish and create a network of resilience coordinators amongst the Foreign Service nationals and remind all of us in very straight terms that you guys rotate posts every 4 years. We don't. We are the longevity. We're the connection to the community. So I think we have to be super intentional in an organization like USAID to make it happen, but I think there are great opportunities where we can be super intentional about it. Also in relation to distance from community. I mean, that is something like on a daily basis, I do question like how distant I am and how I seem to be getting more distance, not less, throughout my time. I've been in Washington for now 7 years. But my experience is rooted in over a decade and a half, having lived in northern Kenya, Somalia, having worked in South Sudan during Operation Lifeline Sudan. And so I don't have contemporary knowledge of having engaged. So I rely on relationships, I rely on our Foreign Service nationals, our partners, authentic relationships. I am classically brought around on dog and pony shows when I go to countries now, so it's very difficult to have authentic, genuine conversations. So I really have to rely on other people. But I always dial back to that experience in Garissa in 1998 when I was really given an amazing opportunity young in my career to be working with communities directly. And so I miss the closeness. I know there's purpose in how distant I am right now. And I very much hear what Giang is saying. You've got to practice self-care. It is about ourselves. At this moment in time, I'm imbalanced one way. At other moments in my life, I've imbalanced the other. So work-life balance for me is different levels of imbalance at different points in time. Just briefly on the scales question, which I thought was a good one. We've got this definition for resilience at USAID. It's such a product of 1,000 bureaucrats, but it's the ability of people, households, communities, systems, and countries to mitigate, adapt to, and recover from shocks and stresses in a manner that reduces chronic vulnerability and facilitates and so
it covers everything.
It covers everything, but what it does do is it specifies that resilience is not about an outcome. It's a set of ability, it's capacity. That ability and capacity does not exist at a single scale. It actually exists at multiple scales: people, households, communities, systems.
Yeah.
A lot of the interesting measurement work doing, we are not assuming because the system's resilient that people inside that system are resilient. And so we're actually looking at the interscalar relationship between resilience at different levels. So I think there is a tendency to focus on the household and community. Maybe it's the term self-reliance. Maybe it's this bounded rationality that we measure well through household surveys and maybe community focus groups. So the real measurement challenges are on the system scale. On the Feed the Future Ethiopia question, we can have an offline conversation, but the sort of punchline to that is there is no USAID project, whether it's yours or somebody else's, that's going to solve the problems of Ethiopia. And I think one of the good things about the journey to self-reliance and the way we've approached our work on resilience, even in Ethiopia, is that we're being very explicit that we are not the scale agents. We had a very successful program implemented by CARE called the GRAD program. It was layered on top of the Productive Safety Net program and successfully helped 33,000 households increase their income by $376 and graduate from the safety net, and everybody was applauding. 33,000 households, that's important for that 33,000 households. From a transformation perspective, it's virtually meaningless. The power of that intervention is that the government of Ethiopia has now taken that set of activities, demonstrated, and applied it to its 8 million person safety net. So our commitment, and I think the journey for self-reliance matters as a concept because it's saying don't think of these projects as ends in themselves. We are not the scale agents. These are policy tools. These are tools we can get communities, we can get governments, we can get private sector to think differently. So those things when we talk about agency, aspiration, collective action, social capital, and this will be my closing, in lieu of my closing, those are what development is. Those aren't approaches to development, that is development. And I am come from a monitoring and evaluation background, so the exciting thing for me is all the measurement work being done around that, and then how we can link that to sort of classic well-being outcomes. Households in which women were empowered fared better in the face of a flood event in Bangladesh in 2014. Households in which were able to lean on other households fared better than households that have not. Households in Niger where women aspired more had better nutritional outcomes than households in which women did not aspire as much. So these are powerful concepts. You could, I mean, we live in DC, we throw around jargon all the time, but these are powerful concepts if we embrace them and we embody them, and I think they really speak to this idea of community-led development. But now I'm questioning everything because I said
Well, thank you so much. This has been really enriching for me, and I will be looking for the Refine and Implement project for sure, 7-year project that USAID is doing. So thank you so much to everybody in the room, and thank you so much for our panel. And just to leave you with the quote from Giang, nurture the ripple effect. I love that. All right, thanks again.